I watched Jane die.
This scene is only a few seconds long, but it destroys a character completely. Not because of what happens, but because of why it happens. Because in this moment, Walter White doesn't just try to hurt Jesse Pinkman. He tries to save himself, by destroying him. And the most terrifying part is, he does it calmly, deliberately, and without hesitation. Hank Schrader is dead, and with him, everything Walter White believed about himself dies too. For years, Walt convinced himself that he was in control, that every decision he made had a purpose, that no matter how dark things got, he was still the one pulling the strings. But now, standing in the desert, watching Hank's body fall, that illusion collapses in seconds. This wasn't a calculated move. This wasn't part of the plan. This was failure. And for the first time, Walt is forced to confront something he's avoided all along. This is his fault. You can see it in the way his body reacts. He doesn't scream. He doesn't process it like a normal person would. He just drops, almost like his body gives up before his mind can even catch up. His eyes go blank, unfocused, like he's staring at something he can't fully understand yet. There's no controlled crying here, no emotional release, just silence. Because this isn't grief. This is something much deeper. This is the complete collapse of the identity he built for himself. The genius, the provider, the man who was always one step ahead. In a single moment, all of that is gone. And what comes after that is not acceptance, it's survival. Jack offers him a way out.
You get in your car, and you're gonna drive out of here. All right?
It's simple. Walk away. Stay alive. But Walt doesn't even consider it, because his mind is already doing something else. It's searching, not for a solution, but for someone to blame.
Pinkman.
That line doesn't come from strategy. It comes from somewhere much more unstable. Because on the surface, it sounds like anger. It sounds like revenge. Walt believes Jesse caused this. He believes Jesse led Hank here. And now, Jesse deserves to die for it. That's what he tells himself. That's what we see on his face. Rage, desperation, accusation. But underneath that, something else is happening. Something much more dangerous. Because deep down, Walt knows the truth. He knows who really set this in motion. He knows whose choices led to this exact moment. And he cannot live with that. So his mind does what it has always done. It rewrites the story. It takes that guilt, and pushes it outward. Turns it into anger. Turns it into blame. Turns it into a target. Jesse.
If you can find him, we'll kill him.
Found him.
That line is not just information. It's intent. Walt isn't asking anymore. He's pointing, directing, almost like if Jesse dies, this entire situation will finally make sense again. And that's the shift. On the surface, Walt wants Jesse dead, but underneath that anger is something far more desperate. He needs Jesse to be the reason Hank is dead, because if he isn't, then Walt is. But before Walt can act on that decision, something shifts. Jack is ready to end it. The gun is already raised. The outcome is seconds away from being final. And then Todd interrupts.
He was out here with those feds, working with them. Shouldn't we maybe find out what he told them first?
It's calm, measured, almost respectful. But in that moment, control quietly moves. Because this isn't how Walt operates. Walt built everything on anticipation, on staying ahead, on being the one who decides what happens next. But here, he's not deciding, he's reacting. Todd is the one thinking forward, evaluating risk, delaying action. And for the first time in a long time, Walt is no longer the most composed person in the room. That position, the one he built his entire identity around, is gone. And that loss doesn't create clarity, it creates pressure. Because when someone like Walt loses control externally, he tries to reclaim it somewhere else. Jesse watches this unfold. At first, it doesn't make sense. When Walt says, "I found him," there's a delay before it lands, because it contradicts everything Jesse has known. This is the same man who once protected him, who stepped in when things went too far, who made choices that didn't always make sense, but kept Jesse alive. So for a moment, Jesse's mind resists the idea, but then the gun comes up, and reality replaces expectation. There's a brief glance upward, not searching for help, but letting go of it, like he's already accepted what's coming. And maybe that would have been easier, because death is direct. What comes next is not. When Todd stops the execution, Jesse is pulled back into the moment, back into waiting, back into uncertainty. And that's where it changes, because now Jesse has time to understand. Walt isn't conflicted. He isn't hesitating. He's allowing this. And that realization doesn't hit like fear. It lands like recognition. Every moment they shared starts to reframe. Every time Walt called him partner. Every time he said they were in this together. Every time he stepped in when things got out of control. Now, those moments feel conditional, situational, not absolute. And in that shift, something stabilizing disappears. Because Jesse isn't just losing protection. He's losing the belief that it was ever real. And that's when Walt speaks. Not out of urgency, not out of necessity, but because something inside him hasn't resolved.
I watched Jane die.
I watched Jane die. There's no build-up, no hesitation, just a direct release of something that's been buried. And what makes it powerful isn't just the words, it's the timing. Because this isn't new information for Walt. He lived that moment. He made that choice. And then he justified it. For a long time, he framed it as something necessary. Something that ultimately helped Jesse. That framing allowed him to carry it. But that version of the truth no longer serves him.
I was there, and I watched her die. I watched her overdose and choke to death.
Now he reconstructs it, detail by detail, not to explain, but to force Jesse into the experience. Because the more specific it becomes, the less Jesse can distance himself from it. He doesn't just hear it, he sees it.
I could have saved her, but I didn't.
And this is where the meaning locks in. Because this isn't an accident being revealed. This is a decision being claimed. Walt isn't avoiding responsibility. He's choosing when to take it. And more importantly, how to use it. Because earlier, this truth was hidden to preserve something. Now, it's revealed to dismantle something. Jane wasn't just a person Jesse lost. She represented a direction his life could have taken. A version of himself that didn't end up here. And in one sentence, Walt removes that possibility. Not by changing the past, but by redefining it. That's what makes this moment different. It doesn't just hurt Jesse. It reorganizes how he understands everything that came before. Walt doesn't wait after saying it. He doesn't need a response. Because from his perspective, the shift has already happened. And Jesse doesn't react the way you'd expect. There's no immediate outburst. No desperate resistance. Instead, something inside him disconnects. The panic that was driving him moments ago fades. Not because the situation improved, but because something internal has stopped responding. Because this isn't just about betrayal. It's about collapse. Jane is gone. That future is gone. And now the person who stood closest to him is the one who chose both outcomes. When those two losses combine, love and trust, there's nothing left to anchor him. No version of the past that feels safe. No person in the present that feels real. And that's where the break actually happens. Not when death is near, but when meaning disappears. At that point, Jesse doesn't need to fight, because there's nothing left inside him that believes it matters. And that's why this moment is irreversible. Because Walt doesn't just take something from Jesse. He removes the structure Jesse used to make sense of his life. And without that, there's nothing left to rebuild. And this is what that moment ultimately reveals. Not just about Jesse, but about Walt. Because when everything collapses around him, his plans, his control, his identity, Walt doesn't face what he's done. He redirects it. He reshapes it. He finds a way to move the weight somewhere else. And in this case, that somewhere else is Jesse. That's why this line matters. It isn't just cruel. It isn't just personal. It's functional. Because by turning his darkest choice into a weapon, Walt avoids having to sit with it as a failure. He transforms guilt into action, regret into control. And in doing so, he protects the one thing he still can't let go of, his image of himself. But that protection comes at a cost. Because in order to preserve who he believes he is, he has to destroy the one person who still saw him differently. And once that happens, there's no balance left. No contradiction. No part of him pulling in the opposite direction. This is the moment where that tension disappears. Where the man who once justified his actions, no longer needs to. Because there's nothing left to justify them to. And that's why this scene isn't just about Jesse breaking. It's about Walt crossing a point where he no longer needs anyone to believe in him, except himself.